In this part of the course, we will establish a connection between the server and the database instance. And in order to do that, we need to import database/SQL and create a global variable called db that is of the SQL.db type. So this db variable will be available inside the main function as well as all the handler functions that you are going to create in the next sections. So the next thing we need to do is we need to go back to our Elephant SQL details page and copy the URL because we're going to need this URL to establish a connection between our server and this database instance. Go to the bottom of the page and click on documentation, and on this page you will find information on how to establish a connection between the server and the database instance. Click on Go. That brings you to this page where you have an example code on how to establish the connection. So here you can see that they are using a library called PQ, and PQ is a recommended way to connect your server and database. And on PQ they invoke parse URL, and into parse URL they pass an environment variable holding the Elephant SQL database instance URL. Copy the entire line of PG URL. Go back to your terminal and just above router inside your main function, paste the code and go back to Elephant SQL database instance details page. Copy the URL and replace the parameter that gets passed into parse URL by the URL you just copied. Just make sure the URL is a string and it's surrounded by double quotes. And if there is an error or if the error is not nil, then you need to exit with log fatal. You pass error into fatal. Otherwise, you invoke the open method on the SQL package, and into open you pass two parameters. The first parameter is the driver name. In this case, our driver name is Postgres, and the second parameter will be PG URL, which contains information about our data source. And SQL.open also returns two values. One is a database, the second one is an error. Okay, now we don't use a shorthand declaration syntax here because we have already declared error here, so we just use an assignment operator. And if there is no error, we proceed, otherwise we have to check for error. Now let's do some testing by printing on the terminal the value of db as well as the value inside the PG URL. So now go ahead and run your program, and on the terminal you see the values of Postgres URL and the db variables. So inside the PG URL variable you have db name, which is the database name, the host, password, the port, and the username. And below those values we have the value inside the database or the db variable. Now let's go ahead and look at the Sql.open method. Here inside the Sql.go file, open is defined as a function taking a driver name and data source name and returns a database object and an error. And here the comments give you some details about the method, and you can even look at the db return type and see the fields inside this type. We can go back to our main.go file and let's get rid of this print statements, and let's enter one more line of code that will basically tell us if our connection has been established or not. Okay, so ping is a method that returns only one value, and if there's a connection or if the connection has been established successfully, the response or the return value would be nil. Otherwise, a real value will be returned, which indicates an error. Go back to your terminal and run the program, and here you can see nothing is being returned. That means ping is not returning anything. Therefore, our connection has been established successfully.